Welcome to the GCI Conference Center. Please enter. Thank you. Please stand by. You will now be placed into conference. There are 11 participants in the conference.
Yeah, Jaime's on here as well.
Oh, good.
Mr. Miller, are you online? Deshak? Morning, Casey. How are you? The fish running out in Dillingham yet? Mr. Schulte, are you online? Mr. Miller, are you online?
Good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Flinkhart, did I hear you?
Yes, sir. I'm here with Carrie in the office. Good morning.
Okay. Ms. Wilson, are you online? Mr. Schulte, are you online?
This is Jaime. Can you by chance, forward me the agenda? I never received it, or at least I can't find it.
Absolutely. It's on its way now.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Schulte, are you online? And we got another minute or two.
Good morning.
Morning, Bruce. How are you?
Great.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. This is Joan.
Hi, Joan. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good. Somebody's driving. Okay, well, I show it is 9 o'clock and on June 10th. So I'm going to call the Marijuana Control Board meeting to order. We are doing this via teleconference. We were scheduled to be in Fairbanks. If I understand from conversations with Ms. Wilson, the governor has or is going to waive the statute requirement for us to meet in each judicial district during the year because of the fact that we are teleconferencing and will not be in person. We will talk about our August NOM meeting at the end of this meeting sometime tomorrow. But for now, we are all either in our offices or homes, and so we are not meeting in the 3rd Judicial District in Fairbanks. With that, I will call us to order, and if Ms. Craig could call the roll, please.
Lauren Jones.
Here.
Nick Miller.
Here.
Christopher Jaime. Casey Deshak.
Here. I'm sorry about that.
Bruce Schulte.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, and
Mr. Chair.
Start. Yes, Ms. Wolf.
One brief correction. I think there was a typo on our agenda. Fairbanks is in the 4th Judicial District, and I do hope to report to you on the suspension of the Judicial District requirements by close of our meeting tomorrow. I hope to get a final answer to you on that.
Okay,
so thank you.
Okay, are there any requests for changes on the agenda? Hearing none, I am going to request that we take up the resolution for former Chair Mark Springer before we do public testimony, since the scheduled public testimony for 10 o'clock, it's not going to take us an hour to go through our roll call, and since there's no approval of minutes. So I will do that, and then we will take our public testimony shortly thereafter. Are there any other suggested changes to the agenda? Okay, I'll consider the agenda approved. We don't have any minutes, so we're down to board governance, and this is a time for each of the board members to declare potential conflicts or anything that might affect our role. If nothing has changed from the last meeting, you can just simply say no change, or if there's any change you feel that the board should know about, that would be good to go. So with that, Mr. Miller.
No change.
Thank you. Mr. Jaime.
No change.
Mr. Schulte.
No change.
Mr. Deschuk.
No change.
And I am no change. Although I think I'm greatly changed on so many Zoom and teleconference meetings, I don't know if I'll ever see anybody in person again. Okay, so with that, we're done with the board governance. And I would like to take up the resolution of appreciation for Mark Springer. This was brought to me by Director Klinkhart. We worked on it. I think he sent it out to all the board members. He said that there was not any changes made by the board members. Yesterday, the chair of the ABC board read the resolution for their outgoing chair into the record, and so I'm going to do that. If there's any additions or changes that members want to make at the end of that, we can do that before we would vote to approve. I will move this resolution. The Alaska Marijuana Control Board hereby votes and resolves to acknowledge Mr. Mark Springer for his exemplary work as a member and chairman of the Alaska Marijuana Control Board. Upon hearing of the recent passage of the law creating the marijuana industry and its new governing body, the Marijuana Control Board, in 2015, Mark Springer made the decision to provide Governor Walker with his resume for consideration for an appointment. Mark Springer was determined to help create this new industry from the ground up. As one of the board original members for the past 5 years, Mr. Springer helped to create confidence in the public process while supporting a fledgling industry. Working with the many and varied groups, he helped to develop an entire set of brand new and robust regulations. Mr. Springer managed to accomplish such a large task with a minimum of contentiousness as he worked tirelessly to balance the needs of a new industry alongside safety to the Alaskan public. As the rural member of the board, Mr. Springer was representing a large and diverse geographic area with diverse interests. Not an easy task, but one he excelled at. The Alaska Marijuana Control Board wishes to publicly thank Mark Springer for his leadership, his guidance, and his sense of humor as he worked to take and assist a brand new group of Alaskan entrepreneurs and direct their efforts into an established mainstream Alaska industry. Dated the 10th of June, 2020, to be signed by myself. If there's any additions or changes or comments before we vote, I'll start with Mr. Miller.
sorry, was on mute. I have no comments. I will tell you that Mark's been a great friend, and I still talk to him on a regular basis and appreciate everything he's done.
Hey, Mr. Jaime.
I'd just like to say that I'd like to thank Mr. Springer as well. This was my first statewide appointment to a board, and he shepherded me through the process, and he was always lighthearted and easy to talk to, and very knowledgeable. So I just want to thank him.
Mr. Schulte.
Nothing to add. Sounds great. It's great working with Mark, and I wish him well in all of his future endeavors.
Mr. DeShock.
Nothing to add.
Okay. All right, thank you. I will note that I talk to Mark infrequently, but we share text messages back and forth every once in a while. Since Mark is back on the Bethel Assembly, he's also now representing that area on the Alaska Municipal League Board, which I also sit on. So he and I share another board together. We've known each other a long time, basically through AML and both being elected officials. So with that, if there's no objection, then I will consider this resolution passed, and Mr. Klinkar can finalize a format for that and send that out to Mr. Springer.
We'll do that, sir. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Hearing no objections, I will consider that to be done. Okay. So it is just about 10 after 9. We're about 50 minutes early. I guess I'd like to set a precedent and keep that going. So I will open this up for public testimony. Public testimony is limited to issues not on the agenda. And please keep your comments brief, to the point. If you have something in writing that you could share, you can send that to the marijuana mailbox, and you can summarize it. I'm not going to limit the time, but please keep it short. I don't know how many people are on. Taking public testimony when we're all on the telephone is difficult at best, so bear with us. When you're recognized, please state your name and probably spell your last name so that the Ms. Craig and her staff, when they're doing the minutes, can properly spell your name. So with that, I will open it up for public testimony. I'm sure there's people out there, so first person to get my attention, who would like to talk on public testimony on non-agenda items.
I'm free to speak if nobody else is. My name is Victoria Davis. I'd like to express my concern today. I feel that the board seems to be critical, or perhaps not critical enough, from business standpoints of owners when they are applying for marijuana applications. Once these companies are open, I feel that you guys all of a sudden want to take a hands-off approach when handling serious matters. There are clear regulations in place for standard business operations, and I am shocked to know that when these issues are brought to AMCO's attention, that there is no action or investigation into these concerns. When you allow businesses to knowingly operate against the law, you are not only setting a bad example, but you are also belittling the hard work of business owners who have put forth the effort and efforts to operate their exemplary businesses. It puts a bad taste in my mouth that the regulatory board of the industry I'm not only passionate about, but also invested money into, absolutely shows no concern to these violations. Thank you for your time today. I will be forwarding my public comment over to you guys, and hopefully I will hear from you shortly.
I appreciate that, Ms. Davis. Is there any questions of Ms. Davis from the board? Okay, hearing none, thank you very much, and I look forward to
that you guys aren't serious about how these businesses are operating, and that you guys don't have any concern when I'm talking to you guys about this now. I'm very disappointed in you guys. I hope you know that.
We understand.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr.
Next
Chairman?
person? Mr. Schulte.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. Well, it wasn't really a question, but I hear what she's saying. I actually have some concerns myself that I expect will be, well, I expect to bring up later in our meeting. So,
well, there's businesses out there taking millions of dollars from people, and this is unacceptable at this point, just so you guys know.
All right, thanks.
I think somebody put us on hold. So we got hold music in the background, and since they're on hold, they can't hear us. So we'll wait a second and see if it stops. Thank you. Okay, next person who wishes to testify.
I would like to testify.
Please, and state your name, please.
Thank you. Good morning, AMCO board and staff. My name is Sam Hanson, Hanson. I'm the Matsu Borough resident. At your January meeting, I shared with you that Mr. Happy Farms, a limited cultivating facility in the valley, had been emitting odor onto his neighbor's residence property for 8 months. I also shared that Anchorage has zoning and the Matsu Borough does not. There are now 37 cultivation facilities operating or waiting for inspection in Anchorage and 80 in the Matsu Borough. Last year, on June 19th, 2019, owner Mr. Dykus of Mr. Happy Farm stated on the residential member Facebook website, which has 451 residents on it, he said, "Thank you for bringing the odor issue to my attention. I will address it now rather than waiting for an official complaint to be recorded and go through months of talking with AMCO and such, which you are more than welcome to do if you haven't already. So at least nobody will smell something unpleasant to them." A week later, Mr. Happy Farms received a notice of violation witnessed 360 feet from his facility. March 9th of this year, your enforcement office emailed Mr. Happy Farms' neighbors, citing that they provided Mr. Happy Farms with an advisory, the first and only advisory in 365 days. James said that he had 32 complaints for odor from them during January and February of this year, and that Mr. Happy Farms upgraded their scrubbers to fix it and sent them photos. James said that he met with the Matsu Borough only to find out that they do not enforce limited facilities. James contacted the Matsu troopers, stating that they had agreed that they would report any odor of marijuana they detected from repeated customers that they received and that was passed on to them. These residents told the troopers on numerous occasions they never showed up. Now they're being told that they will make a note in their file that they have called in. Neither the Matsu Borough or the state troopers are responsible to enforce AMCO's odor regulations. Please know that many of the complaints that come into AMCO come in during working hours. James said that we have established enforcement to continue to check for odor and assign someone to check on it during the evening and weekends, as this is the time that you receive complaints. These families cannot be outside on the property and cannot leave their windows and doors open when Mr. Happy Farms' odor is present. You are the only obligated organization that can make this stop. James can tell you that Mr. Happy Farms is not the only cultivation facility in the borough that has complaints for odor emissions. Today is 365 days since AMCO started receiving complaints. And I'm going to ask you again, ask the board, how many months would you put up with odor on your property? This is pretty unacceptable. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'll take questions if you have any.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hanson. Are there any questions from the board for Ms. Hanson?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Bruce Schulte.
Mr. Schulte.
Yeah, Ms. Hanson, does the odor appear to be specific to a time of day or a time of week or time of the month? I mean, do you notice any pattern?
Do I notice any pattern? It's not every day. It's not every day, and sometimes it's at 2 o'clock. Sometimes it's in the afternoon. Sometimes it is so strong it burns your eyes. One of the neighbors just had dirt delivered, and the guy got out of the truck and said, "What is that smell?" It's up to 500 feet away to a third neighbor. This is constant. These neighbors have reported the weather, whether or not the wind is blowing, what direction the wind is blowing. They've done everything that AMCO has asked them to report. And sometimes it lasts an hour, sometimes it lasts longer than an hour. It depends on how strong it is. You can't even let your dog outside with leaving the door open, or it engulfs your house. If you drive up in the wintertime, it comes into your car when you're sitting in your driveway. Open your garage door, it engulfs your garage. So it's not the same every time. Some are way stronger than other times, but it's there. It's unacceptable. Cultivation facilities do not need to emit odor. This is constant. James can tell you the frequency of all the calls during this year. And he can tell you what day they came in, and he can tell you exactly the time of day, because everything's been reported via email to James. Ask him for a report.
Thanks.
Because it's not just one family that's reporting.
Okay, any other questions of Ms. Hanson?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Mr. DeShuck.
Yeah, my question would be, could I get one more, or get a description again of the location of the facility, the cultivation facility? I'm not familiar with it, but just wanted to hear it again and see if I could place it a little bit better.
You bet. It's located off Bogard. You know where the Bogard Road, I'm sorry.
I'm roughly familiar with Bogard and where it's located.
Do you know where Shaw's Tri-Lake subdivision is?
I do not, but
okay.
I set up. Is it within inside of Wasilla city limits?
No, it's not. They're very small city limits. This is in between Palmer and Wasilla off Anderson Lake. It's, you know where Selden Extension from Bogard is?
I've got an idea now.
Right there. That area.
Mr. Chair, this is Joan Wilson.
Ms. Wilson.
I'm just cautioning the board that they are final decision makers should anything be brought forward, and I don't think this is the intent, but people really shouldn't be going out there and conducting their own investigations if that was the purpose of the question.
Thank you. I don't think Mr. DeShuck is leaving Dillingham because he can't.
I just wanted to clarify. We had this issue come up yesterday, and I didn't think so, but we want to keep the board as neutral as possible on any issues.
The reason for the question is I wanted to revisit whether or not how we handle local, with the complaints, how many levels that they go up, because we defer, or with delegation down, and I just wanted to make sure that we didn't overstep if a decision, because I would think from a board perspective, if a local community had ruled in favor of the cultivation facility, that we would allow that delegation down, or generally speaking. But it sounds like it's outside of the city limits, and I wasn't exactly certain where the Matsu borough had fallen and how the decisions have been made. So that's the reason I was asking where the authority was.
Yeah. Mr. DeShuck, Mr. Miller could probably answer this too, but I believe both the city of Palmer and the city of Wasilla have a ban on marijuana businesses within their city limits. So all of the Matsu marijuana businesses are either outside the city limits of Wasilla and Palmer. None of them are within the city limits of those two cities, if I understand correctly. And Mr. Miller would know best.
That is correct.
Yes. And the only two police forces other than the troopers are in the city of Wasilla and the city of Palmer. Okay. You had any other questions, Mr. DeShuck?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Hanson. Next person who wants to have public testimony. Somebody's banging in the kitchen. Could you mute your phone, please? Whoever's making noises in their kitchen, could you please mute your phone? Okay, is there anybody else that wants to testify before the board on public testimony?
This is Matthew Shelton with Mr. Happy Farms, license 17296, I believe. I would like to speak.
Okay. Just your last name, please.
Shelton.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a statement on the last public comment. I am specifically the licensee that has been targeted with this, and I have gone through all the same hoops that they have on my end. I've had meetings with enforcement. I've had enforcement out here numerous times. I keep an odor log. I have odor affidavit forms for any people that come over, my water delivery guy, anybody service, any consultants. I keep all that as well. Both the Joes and enforcement have been out here, I would say at least 6 times that I've seen, which is unheard of for a cultivation to have AMCO out that many times, and, that I've talked to. And, every time I've had one notice violation when I first started up within my first 3 or 4 months of operation. As I was getting it dialed in, now I have everything filtered. I am a small grow. I've heard complaints up to 500 feet away in multiple directions. I don't know if the board's familiar with cultivation, but, that's next to impossible with a building like this running on filtration, carbon filter. I've been dealing with this problem. I'm sorry, I'm trying to settle down a little bit. I've been dealing with this problem for 1.5 years, and, I have no recourse on my end. All I can do is say, I'm doing what I'm supposed to. AMCO comes over. They say we don't smell anything. But yet, every time I have to defend this like I'm guilty, and it's just, it's getting real, it's hard and tiring, and I just wanted to speak, and so I could, at least let you know where I come from and where I stand on this point. And thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to entertain any of them.
Thank you, Mr. Shelton. Are there any questions from board members?
Mr. Schulte? Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Schulte.
I'm halfway through my coffee. Mr. Schulte, I'm just kind of curious. Could you just describe for us briefly what your filtration system looks like and how you maintain it?
Yes, I'm almost a closed building. I have one exit port on my building, which is carbon filtered. Other than that, I recycle everything inside my building and scrub it, and do not vent anything actively out of my building.
How do you have a schedule, like a rotation schedule for your carbon filters?
Yes. They're about every 6 months, but mostly it's a by nose odor check for me. When I start walking up to my building and I can smell it within a few feet, it's time to change them. Not when I can smell it 50 feet away. I'm not going to say that my building does not emit an odor, but my building does not emit an odor within 10 feet. That's what I will say, and but my property line is a good 80 feet away to my closest neighbor.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Shelton. Is there anybody else that would wish to testify on non-agenda items?
Yes, this is Brandon Emmett with the Alaska Marijuana Industry Association.
Morning, Brandon. You're on.
Morning, Mr. Jones. How you doing?
Good.
Okay. Hello, board, director. I'm going to present to you the comments of the AMIA. First, I would like to express our gratitude to the AMCO staff and the Marijuana Control Board for helping our industry run safely during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. AMCO has demonstrated improved communication with licensees during this uncertain time. We would like to note that the effective communication from AMCO, including issuing guidance and advisory notices, has helped individual businesses maintain safe operations and best business practices. We are also very grateful to you, Board, for your willingness to explore COVID-19 responses, as industry safety is a top priority for the AMIA. The MCB has provided licensees opportunities to better protect customers and staff during the crisis. We acknowledge that Control Board members have busy lives and want to recognize the extra time spent through the additional Control Board meetings. We understand how valuable time is and have been with you through it, and offer immense gratitude for this commitment. Thank you for decisive action and curbside pickup. Industry has been carefully adapting to this new regulation, and we hope it serves as a way for licensees to keep their employees and customers safe. Additionally, the other emergency regulations are serving the industry well in its mitigation of the virus spread. We'd like to thank all the people in the industry who have found ways to adapt and stay productive. We'd like to thank all retail employees who continue to serve the public, ensuring that licensed and regulated cannabis businesses and products remain viable. We know your job is especially difficult these days, as most of you have been tasked with additional responsibilities, such as requiring customers to wear face masks, enforcing social distancing guidelines, constantly sanitizing surfaces, and limiting the number of people in your store. We thank you. We thank the Board for the verbal resolution of support that was issued to the legislature on HJR 23 regarding safe banking. We want to update you that since the legislature adjourned sine die, the resolution expired, but the sentiment is being passed on to the U.S. Senate as they grapple with relief packages that could include safe banking language. We continue to appreciate support on this touchstone issue. We commend the MCB and AMCO for their commitment to public and industry safety. The AMI looks forward to continuing work with the MCB and AMCO to promote safe and efficient industry practices as the situation continues to unfold. We do, however, want to remind the Board and staff that issues surrounding transportation still exist, and we have and continue to stand ready with solutions. We also continue to look forward to the creation of working groups that may serve the common industry good with our vast knowledge and experience. We ask the Board to move forward in 2020 and beyond with an eye towards removing barriers to entry into the industry. The sale of cannabis no doubt continues to happen in communities where there are no licensed marijuana establishments. And perhaps it may be too late to explore incentives for our community. And perhaps now is not too late to explore incentives for our community to enter this marketplace, and we stand ready to assist in this effort. We don't tend to come before you without a request. So today's request that we believe is doable and simple is to expand depository locations beyond the Lenny Paseo parking garage, perhaps to the state's banks like True North, U.S. Bank, etc., so that tax payments can be positive. If this can't be explored with the Department of Revenue, we would ask that the state at least explore being able to receive cash at other State Department field offices. In closing, we want to say again that we thank you for your dedication and service. We want to thank staff for their hard work and the Director for his improved leadership. We look forward to the continued progress and look forward to sitting down at a collaborations table to move the dial. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Emmett. Are there any questions from the Board?
Mr. Chairman, Bruce Schulte.
Mr. Schulte.
Yeah, Mr. Emmett, good morning, and thanks for that. With regard to the alternate tax payment location, is the Department of Revenue aware of this other location that you mentioned?
I am uncertain whether they are aware of the secondary location or not.
Could you just restate it then? Because I believe we're going to have somebody from that department with us later today, and I'd like to be able to bring that up. Can you just real quickly tell me again what is that location?
So we believe that we can expand it beyond the parking garage, perhaps to either of the state banks. Now we would have to get buy-in from the banks for that. But also, if there are other Department of Revenue or state field offices, that those also be made depositories as well. Because as you know, having one concentrated location not only presents safety challenges, but logistical challenges for their staff as well.
Okay, got it. I apologize. There was some static when you were talking, so I didn't catch the general nature of your recommendation, but I got it now. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions from the board? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Emmett. Is there anybody else online that wants to talk to the board about non-agenda items?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, this is Jana Waldstein, and I just wanted to make a brief comment. I'm hoping that we see the breastfeeding regulation come back in front of the board. I didn't see it unless I missed it on this agenda, so I'm just hoping that the board can direct staff to maybe include that in the August meeting. And then I also just wanted to say I wanted to let the board know that staff members Carrie, Jennifer, and Jason have been just so great these last 5 weeks. They just have been so helpful and so responsive, and they've really done such a good job. And so I wanted to commend them on that, and I hope the board recognizes how much great work they've been doing. And that's all I had.
Hey, thank you, Ms. Wellstein. Is there any questions from the board? Okay, hearing none. Is there anybody else that wishes to testify on non-agenda items? Okay, hearing none, then I will close public testimony at 9:34, and puts us greatly ahead of schedule, which hopefully will get us done earlier tomorrow. With
Mr.
that,
Chair?
Mr. DeShock.
Yeah, I would. As we look at the agenda, I don't know how to make the motion, but I would add in public testimony exactly at 10 o'clock as we move through the agenda to reopen for public testimony. If I were a member of the public, I would call in 30 seconds early.
Okay, thank you very much. I will do that. And I'm guessing that most people who wanted to testify are already on because they're interested, but I will ask again at 10 o'clock or shortly thereafter if we're in the middle of something else. Thank you very much for that suggestion, and I will do that.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we will go to the director's report. Mr. Klinkhart.
Chairman, members of the board, thank you. I'm not going to read my whole report. I just want to hit some and Ms. Welzine, it's nice to hear her comments because the one thing I wanted to point out was that I want to make sure that the board recognizes the amazing work by Jennifer, our administrative assistant, and Jason Davies, our criminal justice. Literally, they have been the glue that has been holding this entire department together. They, from day one of the COVID, they volunteered to stay here in the office in separate areas. They're separated by a couple of doors, and Jason has been our dispatcher for enforcement, handling things. Jennifer has been handling everything from the front, including taking on, both of them have taken on responsibilities that quote unquote are not in their job description. And so I want to acknowledge that without them, I don't know that we would be in the in the place we are now. So I just wanted to say thank you. I also wanted to recognize that someone who's been doing a lot of heavy lifting has been your Assistant Attorney General, Joan Wilson, and I thank her for that. I also want to add that I'll be trying my best to take the enforcement report because Chief Holscher has a family issue that he's grappling with, although, again, says a lot about him. He said if the board absolutely has a question, to call him, and we will try and help him do that as well. So I am open and available for any and all questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the board to the director on his report? We will get to the enforcement report later.
Mr. Chairman, Bruce Schulte.
Mr. Schulte.
Yeah, thank you. Director Clickart, just a couple of thoughts, and I realize with this first one, council may have some thoughts. Back in January, I think we were discussing some issues with a licensee, Common Collective. As I recall, that was referred to an administrative law judge for review. Now, I realize that we probably can't get into any details, but do you or perhaps does Ms. Wilson have any idea when that's going to come back before the board?
I think Ms. Wilson has a whole calendar of things, and she'll share what she can. So, good question.
I do, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Schulte through the chair. So our hearing has been delayed by the COVID measures. I want to be careful about what I tell you as final arbiters, but this is a hearing that both sides determined that in-person fact witnesses would be important to have. And the OAH is opening up for hearings in public beginning in August. We have one of the first hearing dates of August 11th. I want to make sure I get that date right, a week before I think our board meetings. Noting that process, I would expect this issue would come back to you in your November meeting. I don't know if Ms. Franklin is on the phone, who's representing the other party. I don't want to make any misrepresentations or not give her an opportunity to say anything counter, but that's the basic logistic. In the meanwhile, the administrative holds are still in place.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. I mean, as much as I was wondering about it, I'm sure there's other licensees out there that were wondering at the apparent lack of action. But I understand that. Thank you for the explanation, Mr. Chairman. If I may, one more question.
Mr. Schulte.
Mr. Clickart, there was a very public incident described in multiple media outlets recently about some moldy marijuana that had found its way into the marketplace, and there's a lot of related narrative. Is that an ongoing investigation, and do you believe that that's going to come before the board for review at some point?
Through the chair, Mr. Schulte, the investigation is ongoing. Chief Holster and his people are working on it. However, like any investigation, there's absolutely no way to know how long it might take. It will take as long as it takes to get you, the board, the best information, the best evidence, so that you can make a good, fair, and impartial decision. So, but certainly as things move forward, feel free to ask the calendar. On occasion, I can certainly try, as Ms. Wilson did with the other case, but right now it's an open investigation, and we are working with several different folks on that. So, thank you.
Understood. Okay, thanks. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I figured that was probably going to be the answer, but I just wanted to make sure that folks are aware that that's on the radar. It's being looked at. But as I can imagine, it's probably going to be a bit of a process. So, thank you, and I have no other questions.
Are there any other
Mr.
questions
Chair?
from board members? Ms. Wilson.
If it might be of help at some point to the board, yesterday in the Alcohol Beverage Control Board meeting, we had a fairly lengthy discussion about how much information to give board members while an investigation is proceeding. Both Mr. Klink and I, of course, the director and I are new to advising these boards, but we both come from prosecutorial backgrounds or law enforcement backgrounds where we don't want to influence the final arbiter of facts. That said, we don't want to leave you, completely out there knowing less than the public does at large. So I don't know if this is the proper meeting for it, but at a certain point, we'd be happy to have that discussion with you about what your objectives are, and then we can try to figure out how to accommodate them, if possible, under a system that must guarantee due process and neutral arbiters. should there be a dispute regarding someone's license.
Thank you, and I think we'll deal with that maybe at the end in board member comments. If we have some extra time, we'll maybe have a chance to discuss that. I had a brief email exchange with the director when I read the article, and sort of what I didn't want to be blindsided. So generally, I've grown up in government in my professional career, and I've always been told that if I get contacted by a press and I think it might show up, I notify my bosses. And used to be rules that you didn't talk to the press in certain governor administrations, but I didn't want to hear about the investigation in the newspaper. So I think it is worthy of a discussion about how much and how soon the board does get that kind of information. So if I don't remember, maybe you will when we get to board member comments at the end.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are there any other questions of the director?
Mr. Chairman, this is Jaime.
Mr. Jaime.
So through the chair to the director, has there been any movement on restructuring of the AMCO office or appointing a full-time or permanent director?
No, there hasn't been much discussion. I'm sorry, through the chair to Mr. Jaime. There hasn't been any discussion about that. I sometimes ask that question myself, but that's usually stopped pretty quickly with what's the next fire or thing that needs to be done here at the office. So I don't have anything on that. We have been, of course, working on increasing our personnel or replacing folks here within the staff, which has been kind of my direction at this point. But thank you for asking. Long way of saying I don't have an answer.
Sounds good. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Any other questions from board members? Okay. None. The advisory regarding expired operating licenses, I believe that is tab 2, Mr. Klinkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is basically an advisory that went out several weeks ago, and it was part of trying to help the industry and certainly folks that are responsible for making sure that folks that come into their facilities or that they sell to are of age. And with all of the confusion with COVID and other things, it was clear we had to take a look at it. And by the time Ms. Wilson and I did look at it, the answer seemed pretty long story short, we determined that because of the COVID emergency regulations passed by the governor, suspending things such as the Alaska driver's license specifically, that we have established that you can use an expired OL during this time to identify somebody and determine if they meet the requirements for marijuana services. And until such time that the governor rescinds those, folks can continue to do that. I know it's a small thing, but for a lot of folks, it's a help and part of trying to end any confusion for the industry. So I just wanted to formally put that out there, especially for all the folks listening, that it's there and the advisory is on the website. I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Are there any questions of the director? Ms. Wilson, I was not aware that the governor had suspended that person could drive on an expired driver's license due to COVID. What are the rules around that? I assume that if my driver's license expired last November, that's probably no excuse, but if it expired in May, maybe. Is there some date parameters around that might be used?
I will, Mr. Chair, I will look at this and report back on the specific date parameters, but what the governor did is suspend certain portions of Title, I want to get it right, I think it's 28, much the same way, for example, he suspended portions of Title 4. And the issue becomes not necessarily when did your license expire, but can you renew your license as conveniently as you could before. So even if a license were, from an earlier date, there may be a question about whether that should be acceptable. But let me take a look at the governor's suspension order during the meeting, and I can give you a signal about when I'm ready to answer that question for you. Okay,
thanks. It's simply because I know that luckily my wife and I got in before everybody hunkered down so that we got the new driver's license that we can now use to fly if we ever can, if we can ever fly again.
I do know that DMVs are open again, so, you know, I just have to look at suspension dates, et cetera.
Yeah, so, I mean, it would seem to me that if somebody's driver's license expired a year ago, they'd have to do a whole lot to me to convince me that they, just because of COVID, they can't get in to renew it. But if it's happened in April or May, I could certainly understand that. But anyway, any guidance on that might be helpful for the businesses. There's enough issues with alcohol and marijuana and false IDs and those kinds of stuff to be cautious.
Right. I can work with the director on amending the advisory should I find that specific information for you, sir.
Okay, thanks. Are there any other questions from the board? Okay. With that, let's go to the enforcement report, which is tab 3. And I guess, Mr. Klinkhart, that's you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll do my best impression of Chief Holscher. Basically, he does communicate that from an enforcement standpoint, it's been a huge challenge for the last couple of months. They continue. I think the biggest thing he notes is that they've continued inspections. Many of them have been virtual, which has its own problems because when you're not able to see everything, you're relying on technology. They're trying to do investigations digitally or via telephone, but I can speak for myself that you really have to get out from behind the desk and go talk to people, and they're finding that they have to do that. So we're starting to do that, but we're trying to do that safely, not just for the investigators, but for the folks that they're going to be speaking with and talking to. So we've already set up to have one of our investigators travel to a couple of sites to actually meet with folks for an investigation. But and goes to Commerce when they asked about the travel costs and things, they were very adamant about do we have a plan to do it safely, and I appreciate that they were asking those questions. The other thing that I think has been good I worked with James to have the enforcement team prepare and use whatever time they have to be able to work on policies and procedures. And we have actually made huge strides in creating these, something that is very, very important that the enforcement office have and that the board is aware of. And I'm hoping to meet with James in the next couple of weeks, and we may actually have something. This was one of my big goals. One of my big goals put on the board when I got here in November was to help enforcement create a robust and detailed set of rules to live by, to engage in their enforcement, and I'm very happy to say that it looks like we're getting close to having that done. So if there's a silver lining to some of the enforcement folks working out of the office, this is definitely one of them. Also been working and starting to move with an older regulations project, which is the process for enforcement and being able to have if you will, a fee schedule, a bail schedule. So we've dusted that off, and we want to start moving forward with that because I think that alone is going to be something that is going to help the board, enforcement, and licensees have something better system where they know what to expect, they know what the infractions are and what the ramifications are, and allow people opportunities to get those things done. So we're working on that as well. And with that, I will take any questions and try my best to answer them. Thank you.
Are there any questions from board members? Okay, hearing none, I assume people aren't having trouble with their mute buttons. I guess I had a couple of questions that I was going to ask Chief Holscher, so I will ask you. One of the comments in here was that the enforcement staff has been working in terms of the curbside delivery, and I forget what else was in here. Could you tell me, I think in the regulations there had to be a plan change, or at least some notice of how the businesses were going to do that. I did not see any of those in the operating plan changes in this meeting. Could you tell me what the experience is about how many businesses have approached the staff and you've approved curbside delivery? Do you have any of that information?
Mr. Chair, that's a really good question, and we should probably get that for you so you have that number. I don't have it in front of me, but what I can tell you is that the reports, kind of the enforcement reports that I get from James, has been actually very good from the standpoint of the industry, in that for the vast majority of complaints of potential issues with curbside or other things, James has told me that, and this is something that's really good in enforcement, is that oftentimes you get a complaint, you do an investigation, and it turns out to be what we call unfounded, meaning that for whatever reason, it turns out that what was alleged actually didn't occur. And in this case, James, when I asked him, said that a lot of this was because of other people, especially the public, not understanding these new emergency processes, and that when they went and looked, it turned out that the licensees were abiding by their approved changes or their safety and security stuff that they were doing. So that bodes well, and it's also good to know that the enforcement guys are out there looking at it. And I'd much rather have them spend their time looking at something and finding out that everybody's doing everything by the rules. So.
Thank you. And the reason I ask that is that I'm looking back at the emergency regulations, and maybe Ms. Wilson can clarify if we made any changes to this, but part of it says the licensee submits for which fees will be waived, and the director approves a temporary operating plan describing and depicting its curbside or window delivery, including a statement that municipal or other law does not prohibit this accommodation. While this doesn't require that the board approve the temporary operating change, it allows the director under these regulations. I was just curious if we knew how many had submitted, approved, and operating plans, and whether any of those, all of those were approved, if any were changed, because I was sort of looking for that in the operating plan changes that were submitted, but I didn't see any, and but that was part of the emergency regulations. So that's the reason for the question. We should, if they submitted that, have a count.
To the chair, this is Carrie Craig. I just heard from staff, and it looks like there's a total of 35 of these changes that have come through and been approved. Some of these are ID check windows, and there are 19 curbside/exterior window plans that have been approved.
Thank you very much. I didn't realize that there would be that many. Mr. Schultz.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thanks. I apologize about a turn here. I didn't realize I had a question, but maybe it's more of a comment. And
That's
thank
okay.
you for that update from staff. I had no idea it was going to be that extensive either. And given that fact, and given the apparent lack of issues, I guess I would just, first of all, thank staff for dealing with all that, and then commend the industry folks for making this happen with a minimum of drama, because that was one of the concerns when we were talking about this. So yeah, well done, everybody. Hopefully it's meeting the need for the moment.
Thank you. Any other
This is
questions
Jaime. I just have a quick comment. This is Jaime.
Sure,
Quick comment.
Mr. Jaime.
This is in reference to what Mr. Schulte just said. As far as not having any issues with these changes where licensees are able to, sell through windows and such. Not having issues ties into investigations. If you look at the number of investigations, we're down to 94 in the first 6 months, which is significantly less than half of what has traditionally been done at this time. So I think a lot of the reasons we don't have issues is because of the COVID pandemic. We don't have investigators out there in person at these shops. So I just want to caution the board to say that we haven't had any issues. I just don't think we're aware of it. They're not being reported to us. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, there's somebody on the phone that has not muted their phone and we're during a side conversation. Thank you. Are there any other questions on the enforcement report from the board? Okay. Is everybody still on? I didn't lose everybody, did I?
I'm here.
Okay. All right. I just was suddenly very quiet after that person muted their phone, which I requested they do, but then nobody was there. Tab 4 is the notice of violations, and I believe there was only one in here, and that was related to a marijuana handler's card not being held by a trimmer. Are there any questions about the one notice of violation that is tab 4? Okay. Notice of violation of unpaid taxes. I see there was a lot in here. It's about 20-some pages. In prior reports, we had a little chart that said from the Department of Revenue, which ones were on their list. I didn't see that here. That usually helps us go through this. Is there a reason that that's not in this report, or did I miss it?
No, I'm sorry, to the chair. This is Interim Director Klinkart. We had that for the last one, but then of course we had COVID, and as will be explained, and we'll be talking with the representative from the Department of Revenue and Taxation. The governor has, and I do not want to get this wrong, but basically it's my understanding, has kind of temporarily put a hold on some of the tax issues. So I kind of went back and forth as to whether to say, well, here are people who haven't paid taxes, but now it's been on hold. So I went with, let's ask this of the revenue person so we all can kind of understand where we are, how we got here, and where we're going. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Are there any questions from the board? Sorry, I preempted that. Okay. Hearing none. Is Kelly Mazie from DOR, are you on the line?
Good morning. Yes, I am.
Okay. It is 10 o'clock, and I had promised to go back and see if anybody had signed on to do testimony at 10 o'clock. So if you could wait just a minute, and we will check on that, and if there aren't any, or if there are, we'll go through those and then come back to you if that's okay.
Okay.
All right. Mr. DeShock requested that at 10 o'clock we reopen public testimony. If people have called in for the 10 o'clock time. So is there anybody out there who has not already provided public testimony that wishes to provide public testimony on items not on our agenda? This is not a time to discuss anything on our agenda, strictly non-agenda items. If there's anybody who was calling in to be on at 10 o'clock. Okay, once again, is there anybody out there who wishes to testify before the board on non-agenda items? Please let me know. Okay, hearing none, we will go back to our agenda items. I think I was trying to remember, I believe that we were sent a copy of a presentation that Ms. Mazie was going to do, and I think that went out via an email. But I will turn this over to Mr. Klinkart and then Ms. Mazie, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly. Mr. Klinkart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me just ask the board, I believe it's been posted on the website for the public, but is there anybody who doesn't have the presentation in front of them or wishes me to email it to them ASAP?
Was that previously emailed?
Yes.
Okay. I will get it.
Okay. All right.
Okay, there's somebody that has their phone not muted. We're hearing dinging and a child in the background. If they can mute their phone, please. Okay, Mr. Klinkert.
Yeah. This was, actually, I heard this kind of twice in the last two normal, regular meetings, asking for some information about how the tax system works. I had my own questions, and Ms. Is it pronounced Mazzy or Measy?
It's Mazay.
Ms. Zay, I'm wrong on both accounts. Ms. Mazay, thank you.
I was not going to get that.
That's okay. I've heard every variation you can imagine.
I like that better. It sounds classy. It's great. I like that, Ms. Mazay. Thank you. She's been so good about holding my hand through this and talking to me like I'm 12, and so I figure if I can figure this out, she's going to be able to do really well to help educate the board and the public about the process and questions, and even in the last hour that we've been talking, there have been some good questions. So I'm going to shut up and I'm going to sit back and learn. So Ms. Mazay, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And good morning. For the record, my name is Kelly Mazay, and I am the Excise Tax Manager with the Department of Revenue in the Tax Division. I would first like to thank Director Klinkert for inviting me here today to present an overview of the state's marijuana excise taxes. I also want to thank the board chair, Mr. Jones, and the other board members for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the tax division's role in the administration and collection of marijuana taxes. So I think everybody has a copy of the presentation. I'm pretty much going to try to follow that, but mostly it's just notes and to have some of the numbers in front of you when I get there. So if nobody has any questions, I can jump right in.
That's fine. Thank you.
I have mine up.
Thank you. So I'm going to start out talking briefly about the current tax structure, who pays the tax, and how we do that. Then I'm going to bring in some numbers, yay, and talk about tax revenue, past due taxes, and our collections process. I will also be available to answer questions, of course, at the end, but please stop me. I'll try and not talk too fast. If you have questions along the way, go ahead and please interrupt. So let's get started. Ballot measure 2, so just real quickly, this might be old news to some of you, but it might be new. I'm just going to start off with a really, really quick history of just how we got to where we are. This was a ballot measure. It was a voter initiative. It was passed in November of 2014. It was in the ballot measure that dictated that Alaska, specifically the Department of Revenue, would levy a tax on the marijuana sold in the state. It was also in the voter initiative that said the tax division would collect it from licensed marijuana cultivation facilities. So the marijuana tax is imposed when marijuana is sold or transferred, but only from a marijuana cultivation facility to a retail store or a product manufacturer. This is important because it is not a taxable transaction if a cultivator transfers product to another cultivator, for example. It also was exempted. Testing samples to a testing facility were exempt as a transfer. In the voter initiative, it was dictated that the initial tax was $50 an ounce for that marijuana transferred. It also went on to say that the Department of Revenue could decide, it could implement a lower tax rate for other parts of the plant. This becomes important because as we have seen, there's been, there's been a lot of discussion about the tax rate and how it works and why it's not on retail or value or who set the price. And this was because it was in the voter initiative and this is what was passed. It basically said all marijuana that was taxable was taxed at $50 an ounce. So the Department of Revenue started out because we were auditors and we didn't really understand the different parts of the plant, and we didn't know if $50 an ounce, what that meant, or what we should tax other parts of the plant at. So we started off with the $50, which we had to because that was now in the statute language, and we decided that trim, or the other parts of the plant that were not bud or the flower, would be taxed at $15 an ounce. By January 1st of 2019, the Department of Revenue did a regulation project which added a third tax rate. So we were now taxing the required bud and flower at $50 an ounce, and the same, what we call trim or other parts of the plant at $15 an ounce, but we added a $25 an ounce category for marijuana that failed a test for mold, was immature, which might have impacted more like the outdoor grows and weather impacted. And we also added a fixed flat rate for clones at $1 per clone instead of asking everybody to try and estimate its weight and tax that as trim. So those are the tax rates. The tax returns and payments are due to the state every month on the last day of the month following the month of taxable sales or transfers. So this could potentially end up being anywhere from 30 to 60 days after the transfer before the tax is due, depending on what day of the month, of course, that the taxable transfer occurred. If taxes are not paid, the cultivator could have their license revoked under AMCO statutes and regulations. So that was under Title 1738. The Department of Revenue was tasked with informing AMCO of failure to pay taxes due or file returns, and this was required. So we have two things going on there. AMCO is responsible for the licensing and then the revocation or suspension, and the statute says that AMCO can revoke a license if taxes aren't paid, and the law also says that Department of Revenue needs to inform AMCO if taxes aren't paid. So that's our connection there. Does anybody have any questions yet? So moving on, just real quickly, I want to talk about who the taxpayers are. I already mentioned they are the cultivators in the state, licensed active operating cultivators. I did last week when I was putting together this presentation, I looked on AMCO's site and filtered out the active operating cultivators, and I counted 217 active operating cultivator licenses from the AMCO's website. In our Department of Revenue tax accounts, I counted 198 open marijuana tax accounts. And this is very reasonable. A lot of cultivators are active and operating, meaning they have been approved by the board. They have had their inspection. However, they're not actually in full, they're not ready to pay taxes yet. They haven't had a taxable transfer, and it's just kind of let that gap when they're becoming businesses. And we also, on the flip side, we have 24 cultivator licenses that have expired or been surrendered. With each license, new license, what we do is we look at AMCO's website. We keep track of that. We have folks that pay attention to that. And as soon as we see a new cultivator license, we go ahead and take that information and we send them what we call a welcome packet, and we basically give them some tips, let them know what their next steps are, what their obligations are with taxes. We send them a letter, the cash payment instructions, how to register in revenue online. And after that, our same tax employee will call each cultivator and ask them if they received the welcome packet and the follow-up email, and if they had any questions or if they needed help with anything. So we do try to do everything we can because we know this is new and there are a lot of hoops to jump through for new licensing. Now might be a good time for me to address Mr. Emmett's comments from earlier. Is that okay?
That's fine. I was going to barge in and ask that question. So yes, if you would, please.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. So Mr. Emmett had mentioned that the Department of Revenue indeed only has one location where cash payments are accepted. And he is right. We have one location in the Anchorage office. It was extremely challenging for the Department of Revenue to figure out how we were going to accept cash payments in what was predominantly a cash paying business. In fact, we hold steady with approximately 80% of our tax revenue in marijuana is taken in cash. So Mr. Emmett mentioned a couple of ideas. One, could we perhaps have payments made directly to the state's banks, if I understood that comment correctly? And unfortunately, this was one of the first things we looked into, and this brings back the age-old comment that unless Department of Revenue processes the cash itself and takes it to the bank, it is considered drug money. It is tax revenue when the Department of Revenue processes it, collects it, applies it to a tax account, and then sends it to the bank. So we were unable to find any bank that was willing to allow tax payments to be made for marijuana taxes directly to the bank, even if Department of Revenue employs, let's just say as an extreme, if anyone was able to even meet the taxpayer at the bank with them to make the payment, it was still not considered processed. So that idea just didn't go anywhere. We would love to, as far as having other locations, we did look at other state offices, not just revenue. If we could have stayed with, for instance, a PFD customer service office or child support, which are both under Department of Revenue locations, and if we could have made that happen, that would have been great. We actually looked at, for instance, DMV locations had offices all around the state. Could we perhaps use one of them because they were under the state of Alaska? And unfortunately, that comes down to funding. This one office, the one location that we have in Anchorage is cost, we were given $50,000, apportioned to us for, appropriated to us for managing some way to collect cash at this one location. And we could have used quite a bit more. It's expensive for security cameras, the vault, the Dropbox. There's just so much that was involved that the $50,000 pretty much was gone as we just looked at what we needed to do for that. if there was a way to go to our legislators and get funding for cash collections, that would be something we could look at. We have one tax division office in Juneau, but along with just the funding to create a space to collect tax, we also utilize 2 people. You know, everything is done in dual custody. We need 2 people. We are collecting, you'll see a little bit later in the presentation, when I said 80% of our tax revenue, I mean, we are counting a lot of cash and processing a lot of cash all month long, every month. So we also would need funding for personnel. We have what we think exhausted almost every other possibility and option and idea that we would love to have additional locations. We understand it is a hardship especially for taxpayers who are off the road system. Even the drive from Fairbanks, especially in the winter, I understand is tough. The other avenue we could go with is trying to get a bank to accept ACH payments. That's something that right now marijuana is the only tax program where we can't accept electronic payments through Revenue Online. We accept bank checks, money orders, cashier's checks. We have seen there are, probably it's easier in larger jurisdictions to go from place to place to get money orders, but we do have taxpayers who send in, 20, 30 money orders each month that clearly they had to go to several different locations to get to stay under that $10,000 suspicious activity reporting. So this is something that we are always open to new ideas, but it's just we were kind of hit a brick wall with options. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Yes, I have 2 questions, I guess, and I'll sort of preempt. Do you still maintain the secure post office at the airport? That if, and I understand here in Juneau at least one time, post office refused to mail, but my understanding is that DOR has a post office box secured at the airport, so somebody could mail cash there, and then you transport that via armored car or whatever to your offices downtown. And would that be available if someone had a other delivery service other than the post office, so that money could go to that location and then be transferred to DOR as opposed to somebody physically having to go to Anchorage to make their payment?
Right, Mr. Jones, thank you for your question. So the post office, unfortunately, we went all out and got that up and running, and it was working until the post office found out about it, and we were notified by Seattle Postmaster Inspector that we were violating all kinds of federal laws, and that we needed to not only shut that down immediately, but we needed to post their flyers that they provided us on our website and to notify everybody that this was absolutely not allowed. So we closed down that post office shortly after it opened. As far as courier services, I don't know a lot about private businesses. However, I do know that we do get payments from couriers, whether some of them fly, some of them drive, some of them, and these are private businesses, and they will provide that service. And I don't know if how they reach out to potential customers, but I think they, for instance, they might make a run down from Fairbanks and have several different payments from different cultivators in that same drop. But the courier themselves are making those deliveries to the Anchorage office.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from board members? Okay, hearing none, if you'll continue then.
Thank you so much. So why don't we go ahead and look at some numbers. Speaking of numbers, I'm sorry I didn't number the PowerPoint slides, but I think this would be number 5. It's the first slide with a bunch of numbers. So so just to refresh everybody, we started collecting, our very first tax collections for marijuana occurred for the last 4 days of October in 2016. Since then, we've collected over $50 million. In just this fiscal year alone, which is fiscal year 20, coming to an end on June 30th, we've collected over $2 million 3 times in October, January, and most recently, April. Mr. Clinkhart, Director Clinkhart, noted that the governor had extended tax due dates, and that is correct. And so this April number is actually fascinating to me because from February's tax period, so any taxable transactions that occurred in February were due on March 31st. And because of COVID, the governor implemented effective for any taxes due, and I believe it was in the state other than oil and gas, so all the excise taxes, including marijuana, payment plans, payments, and any other type of tax fees that were due on March 31st, that due date was changed until July 15th. So we did notify, we had public notices on the website, but we also went further with our marijuana taxpayers and reached out to each one individually by email to let them know about the governor's extension. And we also were notifying them of changes to the cash Dropbox hours. But the fact that we still collected, we're still averaging that $2 million mark, even when taxes weren't due, is interesting to me. It is cash. There's a lot of cash in there, so I can see why nobody would probably want to continue holding on to that. But we did. I wasn't sure if the numbers were going to drop significantly with the extension or not, but it looks like we have a pretty reliable trend here. If you look at the last 10 months in this fiscal year, we've collected over $19 million in taxes, averaging $1.9 million a month in taxes. So the numbers are pretty impressive. They have progressively increased, where, as you can see, we are skirting that $1.9 million. We're reaching that $2 million mark, and we still have new licenses coming on board. On the next slide, I went ahead and just wanted to show the 4 fiscal years that we have been collecting marijuana tax. As I mentioned, fiscal year 17, which was the taxes for the last 4 days of October 2016, November, December, we collected almost $2 million. And in that next fiscal year, which was a full fiscal year, we collected just over $11 million. Fiscal year 19 really jumped up to $19 million. And as I mentioned, for fiscal year 20, we still have a couple more months and perhaps more depending on if anybody hasn't paid due to the governor's extension. We're already at 19.4 million, so 19, 21, 23. We could be looking at the $23, $24 million mark before the end of this fiscal year. Okay. I'm going to move.
Mr. Schulte.
Yeah, real quickly, Ms. Mazzei, these tax numbers are very enlightening. Thank you. Early on in this endeavor, I think the department was putting out, I think, even monthly updates of the tax revenue, but I haven't seen those for a while. Am I just off the distribution list, or are those numbers not being put out publicly anymore?
Thank you, Mr. Schulte. Through the chair, you are correct. We did used to send out an email notification with some monthly statistics and a link to our monthly reporting. We are no longer doing the email notification, and I do believe we sent out an email notification notifying that we weren't going to send out the email notification, but we are still publishing monthly numbers and fiscal year numbers on our public website. And at the end of this presentation, I will go ahead and go over those reports so everybody knows where to go to find them.
Thank you.
Of course.
Okay, any other questions at this point?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Mr. DeShaw.
So one of the things that I don't know where I could find it would be when we look at these numbers. What does this translate to as far as an effective tax rate on the wholesale value of marijuana? So is it a 20% tax, or is it an 80% tax, or where we see that it falls at the moment, with it being a flat $50 rate?
There's somebody who is not got their phone muted. Would you please mute your phone, please? Thank you. Okay. Ms. Mazzei.
Sure. Through the chair, Mr. Dishak, you have a good question. I'm not able to calculate an effective tax rate, mostly because it's a flat tax rate and we have 3 different categories of it's by weight. So I don't have that number. I think there's been quite a bit of analysis trying to figure that out. However, I don't know that number. I'm sorry.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, Mrs. A, you may proceed.
Okay, so now we have to talk about past due taxes because that's part of the program here. And
Ms. Mazzei?
Yes.
I just thought of a question, and when you started talking about taxes owed, the numbers you presented, are these actual dollars collected, or are these actual owed, and the actual received amount would be less those that owed taxes? Do these numbers include somebody owes $200,000 in taxes and is paying you $25,000 a month? So when I look at the number and I say in April there was 2014 calculated tax, is that actual cash collected, or is that calculated based on your review of metric and the amount of products sold? I was just curious, is that real cash or is that owed?
Mr. Jones, excellent question. The numbers, the calculated tax numbers are based on tax returns that have been filed by the cultivators. So it is possible that the tax has not, they filed a tax return, however, they were unable to make the full payment of tax. So there would be a deficiency there. For the most part, that is absolutely correct, that these numbers reflect the tax returns that are filed. There are some cases where the tax return itself didn't get filed, and that wouldn't be included in here. We do not use metric in order to calculate our expectation of what we should be collecting. So we are going by what was reported on the tax return. So if we find a discrepancy in, let's say, a desk audit or our monthly reconciliation, and we do look at metric at that point, and we see that there was a mistake, we might either ask the taxpayer to amend their tax return, and then it might result in an overpayment or underpayment. We might make the assessment ourselves, and that would then be reflected later. So when we update, this is the beauty of the numbers that we're now reporting, coming right from the tax return and from our tax database. Every month when we publish the monthly numbers, we're going to go ahead and update the past numbers, which would then factor in amended returns or assessments. So does that answer your question?
I think it does, and I'm trying to think back to other places where when I served on a hospital board, if they billed an insurance company $10,000, that was shown as revenue, but they may only collect $7,000 of that. Eventually, that gets shown up in either uncollectible accounts or bad debt or charity care. But and so I was looking, you know, this $2 million in April, you might get $1.6 million in cash. There might be some that comes in later that gets adjusted in a couple other months. So if I looked at these numbers 4 months from now, some of these monthly numbers may actually change. So I would find it hard to track it. And but that helps me know that maybe the Treasury does not have $19,390,000 actually on deposit. So, but that's helpful. It helps me to sort of look at this a little bit differently. Thank you.
And sure. And Mr. Jones, if you don't mind just letting me follow up on your last statement, that brings up a good point about the way we publish. So the Department of Revenue has an annual report, and we have a revenue sources book. One of them will report on just the revenue received during that period. So, for example, it won't tell you what tax period the revenue came in for. It's just going to tell you what came in that month. So that could be for a period that was 3 years prior to that. For example, payment plans, just real quickly, this might put it into perspective. Payment plans are created for past due taxes from prior months. Every month a payment will come in for that payment plan. That revenue is going to show up for that month in the Department of Revenue's annual report as collected that month. But in our marijuana reporting report, it's going to show for the tax period. So in the marijuana tax revenue slide that you have in front of you, the April $2 million amount, that's for the April tax period. So that came in by the end of May. It was due May 31st, right? So that was for the tax period. If in 3 months from now somebody pays what they owed for the April or for the April tax period, that will change this number on the slide. This $2 million might be $2.1 million. 3 months from now because they're paying towards the tax that was due for the April tax period. But on the annual report, 3 months from now, that's going to show up in next fiscal year's revenue. Okay.
I understand. I read your tax book quite often, being a local official and a political.
And the revenue sharing, so this kind of just real quick tangent, revenue sharing for the recidivism fund or the marijuana education fund, this is where some confusion comes in because it's not based off these numbers right here. It's based off the actual revenue that comes in that month. That's what it's shared. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Are there any other questions before she moves on?
Mr. Chairman, Bruce Schulte.
Mr. Schulte.
Yeah, just real quick, I wonder if you could elaborate on that recidivism sweep, so to speak. That, if I'm not mistaken, that was a component of the much maligned Senate Bill 91. And if that's true, could you just explain that a little bit? Because I think a lot of people are unclear on what happens to that money.
Sure, Mr. Schulte, through the chair. I'm probably not the best person to discuss the details of that. I do know that for revenue sharing, we share the Department of Revenue basically budgets for 50% of the revenue we collect from marijuana tax to go to the Recidivism Reduction Fund, which I believe is administered by the Department of Administration, and then is, I want to say, I think it still has to be appropriated by the legislature. And at this point, it has been. And then the 25% goes to which is even more recent, the Marijuana Education Fund, which I believe is Health and Social Services. And so in I guess it's under those department statutes, they dictate what is appropriate spending under those funds. So I don't really know, we don't really know in Department of Revenue much more where it goes or how it's spent after we share it. I think Department of Administration might follow that a little bit more closely.
Okay, thanks for that. I just wanted to touch on that briefly because that's something that kind of came and went, and it doesn't get a lot of press, and I think a lot of people are not aware that a huge chunk of this tax revenue does get allocated or is supposed to be allocated for like drug, alcohol, rehab. So that's why I wanted to touch on that. But no further comments. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, Ms. Nazay, you were.
Okay, and we're getting there. So with past due taxes, I touched on that in the beginning, that by statute, licensed cultivators are required to pay the taxes, and that Department of Revenue is required to inform AMCO if taxes aren't being paid. We have been doing that through a monthly letter, or I should say a list. But for some quick statistics right now, we have 29 cultivators that owe past due taxes for a total of $1.3 million. So this isn't by period. This is total. And as I mentioned, we've collected over $50 million since we started. So we do have a past due amount of $1.3 million right now. 20 cultivators are on payment plans. Of those 20 cultivators on payment plans, that accounts for just over $1 million of the total past due amount of 1.3. To get on a payment plan, the taxpayer goes through our accounting and collections section in the tax division. They're located in Juneau. They give them a call. They enter into a payment plan agreement, and basically penalty and interest and the taxes due are divided by, pretty much just divided, all included, divided by 12, and that if they enter into a 12-month payment plan, which most of them are, then they pay the same amount, a fixed amount every single month for 12 months. That's a different due date usually than, and completely separate than the ongoing regular monthly taxes due. So to remain current on a payment plan, or to remain current and off the delinquency list, which I'll talk about here in a minute, each taxpayer cultivator needs to be current on not only the payment plan if they are on a payment plan, but they also need to remain current on their monthly taxes. So we do have some delinquent payment plan accounts that are at the $354,000 right now. So those are payment plans that are not current. We have 5 cultivators. I think I mentioned there were 20. I want to say there were 24 licensed cultivators that have expired or surrendered licenses. 5 of those still owe us $313,000. And we have 6 cultivators that haven't paid a tax for 9 months or more in the most recent 12-month period. And most recent, I'm only going through February because of the governor's tax due date extension. So we're not including anybody that might have owed taxes or not after February, because there actually wasn't a due date. There's no past due taxes because there wasn't a due date since March 31st. So the out-of-business taxpayers it gets a little bit concerning. You know, a lot of taxpayers don't have bank accounts. It's not, I'm going to go through our collection process here next. But without bank accounts, our normal collection process where we would end up resulting in either taking away the license before the past due amount got really large. We would then send out automatic bank levies, for example, which doesn't help us too much with marijuana taxpayers because many of them do not have bank accounts. But our normal collection, this is our normal collection process, which is the same for all of our tax types. So in the excise group alone, we have approximately 20 tax programs, marijuana being one of them. This process is no different for marijuana than it is for anybody else. So for example, I had mentioned that the numbers that we publish come directly from the tax return. So the tax return's been filed, the taxpayer indicates their taxable transfers and the amount of tax due. However, the tax wasn't paid or it was short paid. So at this point, the employees here in tax do not know about this. It's automated. We have a tax database and program that manages this process. So a notice of demand for payment will mail out 10 days after the due date. So that's always on the 10th of the month because the tax return due date is the last day of a month. So 10 days after the due date, a notice of demand for payment. Along with that notice and demand, there are appeal rights given, right? Because we are saying you owe us this X amount of dollars. However, if you don't agree with this, you have the right to appeal it, and we allow 60 days to appeal it or to pay the amount that we have demanded payment for. We have what's called a final determination letter. That will go out 15 days after the appeal period ends. So if the taxpayer chooses not to appeal and not to pay, it's been approximately 85 days now since the tax was due, we mail out a final determination letter. 15 days after that, if we still don't get a response, our accounting and collections unit is then notified. And that's when they take it into their kind of world with their collections process, which I know has to do with bank levies, property liens, some other, if we had bonds, a bond would then be utilized at this point. That becomes a collections. So it's out of tax at this point and into collections. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, so, I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying, I don't have any questions.
Okay, thank you. So now we're going to link back, we're going to come full circle and link ourselves with AMCO. So here's where tax and AMCO kind of come together. Our statute, which is interesting, under Department of Revenue, so under 4361, says if a marijuana cultivation facility fails to pay the tax to the state, the facility's registration may be revoked in accordance with procedures established under 1738, which is AMCO. So we've now, the statute, and again, this was voter initiative. This is what was passed in the ballot measure. This wasn't through the legislature. So we also have regulations, which then how do we, because the statute says that the license or the registration will be revoked if they don't pay taxes under Department of Revenue. However, we now need to work with AMCO to say, okay, now we have to notify. So the DOR will inform, this is under regulation, will inform the Marijuana Control Board of failure to pay a tax due as required to initiate a license suspension or revocation proceeding. So this is written in our regulations. We have tried, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what was the fairest, for one thing, most equitable way to inform AMCO so everybody's treated the same. So what we landed on basically was waiting until the third week of each month, which is now, that's 3 weeks after the due date, which is at least is between that 30 to 60 days. So now we're at 60 to 90 days later after the taxable transaction occurred that we're notifying AMCO. Also, by waiting to the third week of that month after the due date, we are also allowing for payments that are late. Maybe they couldn't get to Anchorage if they're paying cash. Maybe there was a check, in the mail. Maybe there was just a challenge that needed to be overcome, and we're allowing that extra 3 weeks to make that payment before we take a look at the delinquency and report that to AMCO. So I do want to say that our list, if we were going to provide a delinquency list that's more updated than the last one we gave AMCO in March, it's actually gotten much better. We have had quite a few cultivators, our taxpayers that had delinquent accounts, come to us and get on payment plans. So what we're reporting to AMCO in our monthly letter are only the names of the people that owe taxes that are not current on their payment plan, and it's not a de minimis amount, or out of business. So we're not reporting the out of business because that's separate. So we have been anywhere, we've had over 20 folks on these lists before, and I am happy to see that most recently, if we were going to look as of June 5th, so just last week, there would only be 10 licensed cultivators on the list. So I mean that's really amazing. That's the best it's been since we started reporting the past due accounts a couple years ago. So the 10 is really promising. So if we still, and so what we do also is just report the total number of past due accounts. So these would include all payment plans, because really that is a past due amount, even though it's on a payment plan, but they're not on this list of delinquent taxpayers that that would, in the past, have received notices of violation because of the names on the list. And as I mentioned earlier, we have 29 licensed cultivators owing a total of the $1.3 million. So that is the basic process where we're at. Once we give the list to AMCO, I should mention, confidentiality is really, really important, of course, but it has been challenging working with AMCO with the list of taxpayers. We can't give any details at all. All we can do by statute and now regulation is provide a list of past due accounts. We don't give I can give a total amount in aggregate, but I can't give a specific. So somebody might, well, not de minimis amount, but there could be someone that owes, let's just say, $500,000 and someone that owes $300,000, right? And their names are still on the list appearing to be the same. So that's because of confidentiality. We can't disclose any particulars of any tax account. All we can do is share a list of names of past due accounts. Does anybody have any questions? I'm just about finished. I'm going to talk about reports. Okay, so just to finish up, we do have, as Mr. Schulte mentioned, we do report monthly on our public website, and when you go to the tax division website, you'll go to report and you'll select the tax type marijuana. When you open that up, you're going to be able to select by fiscal year and by monthly tax period. In each monthly tax period, if you were to select that, it will give you that month's data, and it will also below that give you fiscal year to date. The fiscal year to date numbers will be the same on every month in that fiscal year, because that will update on each month. But the monthly numbers will go ahead and the monthly numbers will show you. We publish on the 10th day of each month. Again, this allows for some payments to be late, so we can late returns being filed, that sort of thing. Plus, we want to make sure confidentiality, again, is important, even if you think about just updating reports. So, for instance, if somebody amended a return from a previous period and just one person did it and it was huge, somebody might find out that, oh, they amended their return, and they might be able to figure out who did that. So we update everybody at every month at the exact same time on the 10th business day of each month. So that is all I have. I hope I covered everything that you ever wanted to know.
And then some.
And then some.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the board?
I don't have a question, Mr. Chairman. Just a comment. Thank you for that summary. I appreciate that. That actually did answer several questions that I had. So I have none further. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Any other questions?
Through the chair, Director Klinker?
Yes, Director.
If I may, I just wanted to ask, one of the things is, what can AMCO, myself, and the board do to help, and we've had these conversations about what can we do to help compliance. It's great to see we're down to 10, but going forward, what can we do? I know there's confidentiality, but you mentioned that tax division already does this with tobacco. If you could kind of help explain how that works and what we can do to help with compliance. Over.
Sure. Thank you, Director, through the chair. So we have just in the excise tax group, we have 4 other tax programs that have licensing and bonding requirements. So we have our motor fuel qualified dealers, our tobacco and alcohol, both are licensed and bonded through an annual renewal period through our division. And mining we also have a license for, but without the bond. And I think what's a key difference with the way that the voter initiative and the law was passed is that tax division here, I think for the first time, has a program to administer without having any direct recourse. So we don't have a license that we can suspend. Like with tobacco or alcohol, we would, if someone was past due, we would suspend their license and they couldn't operate. I'm not saying that that's the answer, but we have that control. We also have a bonding requirement that we could use if we needed to. So for instance, if someone did go out of business or just owe taxes and we weren't getting them and they went out of business, we would have a bond that we could go after. That, I think moving forward it's going to take legislation unless there were other things thinking outside of the box, like can you delegate any licensing control to the tax division, for example, or the Department of Revenue. Bonding, I think, is a challenge because it's usually federally insured, surety bond. I think this came up with, I want to say it was Representative Gabrielle Ledoux's bill a couple years ago that tried to offer a bond. And if I recall correctly, there was a problem with finding an insurance company that would provide the bond for a marijuana business. And if there was only one, could we require everyone to go, to just one place? So there was that challenge. I don't know what the answers are. I think it's going to take some brain, take some mind meetings of the mind to try to think outside the box because, we don't want to just take licenses away, right? I don't know. I don't know. I know with tobacco and our other excise tax programs, we control the licensing and we have bond requirements.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much, Ms. Zay. I really appreciate this review, and I think if there's other things on people's minds, it'll come up toward the end of our meeting tomorrow. But I really did appreciate this information, and especially on a couple of new members. I know that Mr. Scholey and I have been around this bush many times trying to figure out what to do. We've had lots of discussions on this board about, do we take away the license of a cultivator? Well, if we do that, then they can't pay the taxes because they have no income. If we keep them still licensed and then they still don't pay, and I don't know that we've come to any satisfactory answer. Maybe that's something that may be a little bit more helpful with this information, but we shall see. But I really do appreciate the information, and thank you on behalf of the board for your presentation today.
Okay, and thanks again for having me, and it really was my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think it is now 11 o'clock. I would like to get through at least the next couple of items, but I think that perhaps, I know my tea and coffee's gone through me, so I show it's 11:01. Let's take a break and come back at 11:10. So I will hear you all back at 11:10. Thank you.
What a joke.
2019 study with Mason University found that the use of body cameras
Okay, this is Chairman Jones. I show my phone says it is 11:10. I'm going to assume that all of the board members are back, and the director's there. So we are on to tab 6, the licensing report. Ms. Craig.
Thank you, Chairman. The vacant occupational licensing examiner position was posted on May 21st, and then it closed on June 1st. When the report was drafted, it was unknown how many applicants we had in the pool, but I believe there are 15, so we will be going through those and scheduling interviews. And to piggyback on the director's comments about staff, you know, I want to specifically give a special shout out to Jennifer Dufresne. She's our administrative assistant. She has come in faithfully every day since the beginning of this COVID emergency. She provides her support to staff, and she has also taken it upon herself to learn additional licensing procedures to ease some of the burdens. Jennifer is an extraordinary asset to AMCO, and it's my hope to further her education in the licensing processes. TJ and Jack continue to process all the marijuana license applications and all the renewals, new and transfers, and all the change documents. Going on to the marijuana license renewal applications, there are 10 renewal applications that have been reviewed and completed as of the date of writing this report. 10 in the queue waiting for review by an examiner. All counts are approximate and will change by the time this report is ready. And then we just want to remind licenses that are in active operating status before June 30th, 2020 must renew their license no later than July 1st, 2020. The renewal notices required by 3 306.035A were sent out on or before May 1st, 2020. On to other applications. At this time, the to-be-reviewed queue for the marijuana establishment applications has approximately 13 applications waiting for review, all of which were received in the month of May. AMCO staff is always working diligently to keep wait times as short as possible. Please keep in mind that applicants are for waiting periods due to the all licensees to send all questions marijuana.licensing.alaska.gov instead of the main line, because licensing staff are working remotely and they do not have issued phones, so it is really hard for them to call people back. So email.
Thank you, Ms. Craig. There's a phone open.
Hey, who wants some chips? 3 chips?
Yeah, I want chips. You got guac?
Oh, sorry guys. Sorry.
Please mute your phone.
Thank you.
Hold on, let me wipe my house. I'll be out in a second.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, Ms. Craig.
Yes, no, I am done. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any questions of Ms. Craig on the licensing report? Okay, thank you very much then, and we will move on to applications from previous meetings. And the first one is tab 7.
In the barn on the side. On the side.
Mr. Jaime. Okay. We are on to previous board action taken. We are at tab 7, Rainforest Farms. Is anybody from Rain?
Brian Hetty for Turning and Horticulture.
Okay, thank you. That was what I was just trying to ask, if there was anybody online.
Through the chair.
Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I would just like to state that I did receive an email about this tab and accusing me of bias on the matter. So I am just declaring that in the public meeting, and to state that, to be honest, I don't have any bias. So either way, I thought that it was important that I should get that out there.
Thank you.
I don't know anything about that email, but...
No, that's okay, please. We're still doing board business here. The item before us was a transfer of ownership, and it was tabled at the April 2020 meeting due to concerns from the board about the excise tax yet to be paid. So I guess the only question we have is either we'll ask Mr. Klinkart first if he has any additional information related to the taxes owed, and then we will go to the individual representing Turning and Horticulture Company. So, Mr. Klinkart, do you have any additional information for us?
I do not at this time.
Thank you. And who is the person from Turning and Horticulture again, please?
My name is Brian Hetty. I'm Turning in Anchorage.
Okay. Do you have any information on the taxes owed to the Department?
Yeah, I have been in contact with Mr. Michael Mullen. The taxes aren't paid yet. He is getting capital together. He believes he will certainly have them paid within the next few weeks, definitely paid by the next board meeting, which is in August. His request is to set this over to the next board meeting, and he has assured me he will definitely have the taxes paid within the next few weeks, certainly, and by the middle of July.
Okay. Is there any action from the board? Is there a motion?
Sorry, I was reaching for my button. Schulte here. I would move then to table this this application to the next meeting so that we can have a little bit better clarity on the tax situation.
Okay. Is there a second?
Jaime, I'll second it.
Okay. Is there any objection? Hearing none, we will table this until the August meeting. I would just request from Mr. Hetty, is that right?
Yes, sir.
That when the taxes are paid, if you could make a formal notification to the AMCO office, and that way we could have a written statement in the record when we meet in August.
Yes, sir, definitely.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this is Charlie Moline. I represent Lemon Creek Holdings. We're the landlords for Rainforest Farms currently.
Uh-huh.
And we have no problem with the agenda being moved, but we wanted to state for the record that currently the Lemon Creek Holdings are past due on rent for a very substantial amount of money. And we just, it's supposed to be settled this Friday, but currently they're slated to be evicted on the 15th of June.
And he's correct. We are, do intend to have that rent paid in full by Friday. We certainly understand Mr. Moline's concerns. He has been incredibly patient and incredibly cooperative, but I understand his patience has worn out. Rent will be paid to him in full on Friday.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I would just ask the director to maybe the investigator here in Juneau can verify that, because if the person was to be evicted and this is a cultivation, there would be all kinds of issues that I think the enforcement officer here in Juneau would have to deal with. So I will leave that up to staff. That's beyond what we as a board can do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Through the chair.
Okay.
Investigator
Yes.
Johnson.
Yes.
Yes, I'm aware of the situation. I've been attempting to contact the owners of Rainforest Farm.
Okay. Thanks very much. I appreciate that.
And this is James Bear with Rainforest Farms. I have received those emails from Steve, and we are working with landlords and everyone to put together a plan to make sure that everything is transitioning properly. So we are in contact with Investigator Johnson.
Okay. All right. That's very helpful. Any other comments or questions on this one, since we've already had a motion to table, and that has passed. So move on to tab 8, which is cosmic seaweed. This was tabled, and I believe the note here says it was tabled because of the product Chill Pill Canine Cookies. And the board was asked to look into the unusual situation. I know that I talked to Ms. Wilson, and she was going to check with Department of Agriculture or DEC Veterinary. So I will first ask, is there anybody from Cosmic Seaweed on the phone? Is there anybody from Cosmic Seaweed on the phone? Okay, not hearing any. Ms. Wilson, did you get a chance to check? Is there any issues we should be aware of regarding approval of any marijuana product for animals?
I have a partial answer, sir. First, I want to start us with the purpose of Chapter 17, which is to declare that the use of marijuana should be legal for persons 21 years of age or older. That's under our 1738-010A. Our regulations on endorsing products really doesn't limit whose use we're endorsing it for. Our statute is much specific that we're talking about human consumption, not animal consumption. I'm reticent to approve a product to advise you to approve a product when it appears to be outside the scope of your statute. I have reached out to both Ag and the state veterinarian, and assuming we are not talking about industrial hemp, which is under their jurisdiction, their response was that non-industrial hemp forms of cannabis cannot be included in pet food because it's regulated by the FDA as a Schedule I drug. Of course, their response to that was, in Alaska, the same thing should be applying to human food, and it does not. You know, we've made the decision to not take the FDA position into account. There is a statute called the Food Safety Management Act that applies to all manufacturers of animal feed. I think there's a question here to ask the licensee how and if they've complied with that. And Ag said their jurisdiction is plants. They're not going to really tell the board or can't really advise the board about consumption of this plant by animals. But they did request me to reach out to the state vet. I have done that, and I have not, or I've reached out to counsel for the state vet, and I have not heard back from them. I've also reached out to assistant attorneys general that advise marijuana control boards in other states. They're actually having a meeting today, and they were going to bring up this issue, but since I couldn't attend the meeting, they're going to get back to me. So I leave you with that is this really within your jurisdiction? And if you'd like to go further, I think we need a little bit more information before I would endorse your endorsement.
Director Klinkert through the chair.
Mr. Klinkert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I concur that the stuff that I looked into supported what Ms. Wilson said. Additionally, speaking with the Department of Agriculture, they say that such food products for animals are under their purview, but then the Department of Agriculture is working on publishing regulations for such food products, but they haven't done that yet, but they are in the process of that. And what I got from that was that it is not under our purview at this time. So hopefully that's some additional information for you.
Mr. Chair, this is Chris from Cosmic Seaweed.
Yes, and your last name, please, Chris?
Chris Logan from one of the owners at Cosmic Seaweed.
Logan?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Yeah, just wanted to let you know I was on the phone.
Okay, thank you very much. So any board questions at this point of either Director Klinkert or Attorney Wilson?
Now, this is Jaime. I'd just like to make a quick statement.
Sure.
People seem to be more concerned about what these animals are ingesting than what people ingest. I think we should work with the Department of Agriculture and get these regulations passed so that animals can partake. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Is there any questions? Yes, Mr. Schultz.
Bruce Schultz. I was just going to echo Mr. Jaime's comments. I agree with him, but I do think we need some parity between the different organizations so that we can be comfortable. The public can be comfortable that what we're doing is everybody that needs to be is kind of on board with what we're agreeing to.
I understand. Is there any questions of Ms. Logan? I guess I have one. Did you hear the attorney question about maybe Ms. Wilson can cite the law again as to whether or not you're aware of that law? Ms. Wilson, maybe?
Yes. Is it Ms. Logan? I want to make sure I heard that right. The law governing food production, particularly for food, is FSMA, the Food Safety Management Act. Have you talked to anyone at AG or Department of Environmental Conservation actually has jurisdiction directly over that statute? Have you discussed production of pet food with them and addressed compliance with that act?
I have not, because we are licensed under the DEC for food production, and they said that marijuana products, edible products, are under the purview of the Marijuana Control Board. So basically, just bounced it back to you.
So you're getting bounced back. Did you mention that you were making a product for animals and not for human beings? I mean,
no, we didn't.
Of course,
we didn't really get that. No, we didn't really get that far in the discussion because they said that's not under our purview. But they just licensed the facility as far as the DEC approved fixtures and cleanliness and that type of thing.
Okay. Well, you've certainly presented a novel question. I've asked a number of people about this, Ms. Logan, and I don't think that I can advise the board to endorse the product until, as mentioned, we can work with agriculture and the degree applicable FDA to ensure, one, we have full jurisdiction over this issue. I don't think we do. Or two, that before we endorse, all prior approvals are in place. And I say this knowing that CBD is from industrial hemp products are certainly all over the market. And go into any pet store and you'll certainly see it there. This is just to confirm you're not using an industrial hemp-based cannabis. Is that accurate?
Correct. The product that we would use in that dog cookie would be a marijuana-based, it's basically a 50-50 CBD THC strain. We're not adding any kind of endogenous CBD from any other source.
Okay. Is there any action from the board?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Schulte.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. I think we approved all the other edible products that Cosmic Seaweed had proposed, I believe, and then this is the only one outstanding. Am I correct in that?
That's my understanding, yes.
Yes, you did.
Okay. Would it procedurally? Now I understand that they pay a fee per product, $200. I mean, is it appropriate for us to simply table this until we can get some definitive guidance?
I believe it's appropriate, and that would not cause any other fee. That fee already been paid. There wouldn't be any other fee.
Okay.
There's a phone. Somebody's got a phone open, and there's a heavy wind. And if they would mute their phone, it'd be easier for us to have our discussion. So, Mr. Schulte, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Conceptually, I don't have a problem with this product. I just want to make sure that, because we are kind of setting a precedent. I want it to be a solid one. But I also don't want her to, having been on point on this issue, I don't want her to have to pay another fee. So I would propose that we just table this. I move that we table this until we can get some better guidance from other state departments.
Okay, is there a second? Is there a second to the motion?
This is Jaime. I'll second it.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Logan.
Yes, I'm totally fine to just let this product work its way through the system, because the ultimate answer that I do want is who is going to regulate these types of veterinary products. And I'm not worried about any kind of deadline or any kind of 90-day issue as far as Marijuana Control Board, but I would like to let this just work its way through the process and see if we can come up with an answer for the industry.
And Ms. Logan, if you're not represented by counsel, may I reach out to you?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion to table to August at least, and maybe beyond if there's still no resolution. Is there any objection to that motion to table? Okay, hearing none, that is tabled, and I appreciate you being online, Ms. Logan, and I appreciate Ms. Wilson reaching out and trying to sort this out for us, because I think this is one of those government-to-government relations that maybe only attorneys can figure out for us laypersons.
I'll be sure to ask my dog how she feels, sir.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If I may, just a quick comment. I don't know how this is going to play out in the next weeks, months, or what have you, but maybe what would be helpful for everyone involved is to get some sort of direction whereby the agency that does oversee food products says, okay, we're okay with pet foods under this category. It's up to the Marijuana Control Board to determine a suitable level of CBD, or maybe they're comfortable saying, okay, here's a suitable CBD level, perhaps based on weight or something definitive, so that going forward we'll have at least something to throw darts at, or the licensees will.
Yeah, and I agree, but I think given the rules with industrial hemp, if they get too much THC in it, then it comes under us. So, this kind of product that I think is being talked about here would not fall under the industrial hemp anyway, but it would fall under whether or not we, as a board, have the ability to approve a product for non-human consumption. Hopefully that'll all get worked out in the process, but I understand your concerns, and I think hopefully we'll get to some resolution. Okay, we are now on to tab 8, or tab 9, and I believe also tab 10. They're all, I think, related, those two. First of all, I would ask if there's anybody on the line from Green Degree or the Next Degree.
Yeah, Kirby Coleman here, the Green Degree and the Next Degree.
Okay. Is there anybody else online related to this issue?
Neil Ainsworth, Green Degree's attorney.
Mr. Chairman, Christina Halleck, also on the line, the attorney for Mr. Mays and Alaska Frontier Cannabis.
Okay. Anybody else online for this issue? Okay. This was tabled because we were informed at the time that there would be an objection. Timely, that objection was received, and I believe that the objection and the applicant's response was in our tab folder for us to review. And so is there any questions from the board members, I guess first for either Mr. Klinkhart or our attorney?
This is Can I get a refresher of exactly why we tabled this application until today, just a little more in depth?
I believe, and Ms. Wilson can correct me, but we tabled this because we heard verbally from the attorney of the objectors as to why they objected. We heard from the applicant why they didn't agree with that, and but we had not gotten the actual objection in writing, and so therefore we tabled it to allow time for that to be done in writing. There's somebody that has their phone open and we can hear a conversation. Please mute your phone. Somebody talking about chow. Could you mute your phone, please? Thank you. And so in order to have the written before us, we tabled the action to this meeting. We now have that objection actually in writing, and we have the response in writing. Does that help, Mr. Heine?
It does, sir. Thank you.
Any questions?
Mr. Schulte? Yeah, so I'm reading the objection and I'm reading the responses, and I guess it's not really clear to me who. I mean, it sounds like that some folks were in partnership. They're splitting. It's not an amicable split, and there's some dispute about being on adjacent property. Maybe somebody involved with this can give us a Reader's Digest for where we are now, because it sounds like a fairly not very amicable situation. I'm trying to figure out at what point it's our problem and to what extent it's the lawyer's problem.
Mr. Schulte, I was hoping that maybe we could get some clarification for the board from our attorney. I'd rather not get into a back and forth with the other two attorneys at this point, but maybe Ms. Wilson can tell us sort of where we might be at as a board and whether or not we are actually being asked to resolve this dispute, or is this going somewhere else? So maybe Ms. Wilson can answer both of our questions.
This is Ms. Wilson. In reviewing the communication, I don't have a current status of this as well, and don't believe I'm in a position to advise the board. I mean, I thought the purpose of today was to hear the objection from the objector and get the response from the licensee, and then I'd be, I think, in a better position. But
Okay.
I'm not trying to shirk my responsibilities towards you. This is obviously a private dispute that's having public ramifications.
Thank you. So I guess I will go to, and I forgot your name, the attorney for the objector, and I can okay, and maybe have her very briefly, since we have all the written material, tell us sort of where they are at and whether or not, I guess I would ask whether or not they are in formal judicial proceedings. So I'll get your name wrong because I didn't write it down. Ms. Halleck.
Actually, that was perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, my name is Christina Halleck, and I represent Mr. Mays and AFC. I'll keep my comments short and mainly focused on the issues before the board today. I do agree that this is not a very amicable split at this point, and it should be resolved in the courts. We are likely to file suit. We have not done so yet. But I do want to focus the board's attention on specifically the allegations made in the objections related to this board's oversight of the operation of marijuana licenses, mainly the $2.1 million transfer that we pointed out that was sent back and forth between various entities multiple times. In the response to our objections, they claim that that was a typographical error and that it has been fixed. We have requested several times for any information on how they fixed that on Green Degree's side of the metric. They have not provided that to us, and since filing our objections, we did get Alaska Frontier Cannabis's QuickBooks file, and there is also a $2.1 million transfer on the same date, the same kind of transaction, but it's for a different number. And so the idea that it was a typo in metric and then also a separate typo in QuickBooks, but for different numbers, and also it bounced back between Green Degree and Alaska Frontier Cannabis at least 5 times by different employees. It just is a little unbelievable, and we believe that that is showing that Mr. Coleman is not being accurate with this board in his use of metric. Also, the issue is not these new licenses being on an adjacent land. It is literally on the same land abutting to Alaska Frontier Cannabis's building. And the operating agreement that Mr. Coleman wrote and submitted to this board under penalty of perjury saying that he will comply with his operating plan specifically says that a member cannot compete directly with Alaska Frontier Cannabis, which is a standard cultivation facility. And now Mr. Coleman, still as a member of Alaska Frontier Cannabis, is attempting to put 2 new cultivation licenses directly next door to Alaska Frontier Cannabis's building, which is in violation of his operating agreement, which he swore to this board that he would comply with. There are a lot of other civil issues about, for example, one of the documents submitted along with their answers clearly says that before taking any actions on behalf of Alaska Frontier Cannabis, all members would be informed and be given the opportunity to either approve or reject those actions. That information was never given to Mr. Mays, who is the majority owner. He obviously objects to what has been going on with his business for the last year, not only with the land itself, but also in the falsifying QuickBooks records and falsifying metrics records. This is a civil matter. Right now, we are still in the process of trying to figure out who's going to own the land and who is going to have the right to lease it. We are in the process of talking with the landlord or the owner of the land for Alaska Frontier Cannabis to buy it outright. But as a member of AFC, Mr. Coleman has already started eviction proceedings. Well, he's filed a notice to quit on AFC, even though he is still a member. Really, those 3 things are before the board right now because they directly apply to Mr. Coleman's tendencies, or rather, whether he can be trusted to file or to follow AMCO regulations and Alaska law. All of the other discussions about his fiduciary duties to Mr. Mays and Alaska Frontier Cannabis, I do agree and concede that those are civil issues. But when it comes to falsifying metric and QuickBooks, that is, I believe, directly in this board's authority. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Is it time for us to respond on behalf of the respondent? Hello?
Yeah, we're gonna wait for the chair, Neil. I think maybe he might be
You guys
muted.
hold on.
All right.
I think we lost Lauren.
Yeah, I was on mute. I apologize. I think Mr. Schulte had asked a question, and then we'll go to Mr. Ainsworth.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through the chair, a question for the director, Mr. Klinkart. There's an assertion that there's some improprieties in metric. Do you know if enforcement has looked at that, and have they made a determination about that?
Through the chair, it's Director Klinkart. Looking at both of these, there seem to be accusations going back and forth. I too wanted to hear what both these sides had before we go forward, because there may be an answer to some of this, but if not, I am prepared to have enforcement look into these things, so I'm very interested in hearing the response at this point. But thank you for the question.
Okay, thanks. Then, Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions. I'll just wait for some clarification, perhaps.
All right. Mr. Ainsworth.
Yes. I'll address the issues, try to, in the order in which she expounded them. Number one, we welcome enforcement looking at anything that we submitted in metric. We did nothing wrong. We made a mistake. It's there. We totally stand on it. We've made no bones about it. If we've done something wrong, show us. We absolutely believe that we did nothing wrong. We supplied all the documents to Mr. Mays and his attorney. So that's the answer to that question. We have no problem. Investigate all you want. We've done nothing wrong. We made a mistake. I'll be happy to sell a $20 worth of marijuana for $2 million. I don't think we're going to get any buyers. So we're just going, it's ludicrous. But that's where we are on that particular issue. On the other issues that she brought up, while Mr. Coleman was the manager of AFC, the board will have documents which will show that Mr. Mays, because of his inability to manage his company, gave up his rights and allowed Mr. Coleman to make those decisions as required. It's there in the packet for you to look at. It was also understood in writing that once the first harvest would occur, that Mr. Coleman would give Mr. Mays back his building and he'd be able to operate his own facility. And now they're saying that's not the case. Thirdly, the property is in a contract for deed with a company that Mr. Coleman owns, Green Land Group, and that they have an agreement with the owner of the property, Mr. Hartzler, who also gave an affidavit saying that's the case. AFC has failed to pay rent. A notice was given by Green Land Group. Mr. Hartzler, who is, she claims is the owner, also gave AFC a notice to quit for failing to pay also. So I think we're in good standing. We welcome court. We'll be more than happy to resolve this civilly. We've been waiting for a lawsuit to be served on since the last time we had the board. But yet that hasn't come yet. I think it's a civil matter. We've been above board 100%. We have nothing to hide. It's there for anyone to look at that wants to look at it. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ainsworth.
You bet.
So, I will try to summarize in my mind, and Ms. Wilson can help me here. We have been asked that Green Degree and the Next Degree are two new licenses. So the question before us is whether or not we would approve these new licenses. There was an objection filed. There has been a response to those objections. There has been some questions raised that may bring about response from our enforcement related to actions on a different license, AFC. And I would just add to that in that my reading of the information that Mr. Ainsworth provided, he provided a document that gave Mr. Coleman exclusive ability to make decisions about it, and I would ask the director, maybe needs to look at that, or the attorney, whether or not that is a change in controlling interest that may in fact not have come before the board for approval, or whether it's even required. But that was a question that I had. So I guess the question for the attorney is, do we take an action to approve and then vote that up or down? Do we take an action to approve with delegation, and simply part of the delegation is to wait to see if this civil matter is settled, or do we table and wait? And I guess those were the three options I saw, were the possibilities for whatever the board might do today. Maybe unfairly, but I would ask Ms. Wilson if I'm close to being correct in terms of what actions we might be able to take today.
This is Ms. Wilson. Of all of the issues that you addressed, or potential alternatives, if we're tabling based upon a one-day lawsuit, that's really not going to give this entity, either entity, a means of relief. So I would recommend that you either grant or deny this application, and I could see a purpose of delegation for assurance of a couple of things. One, how many entities are on one piece of property, and I don't think I heard the objector's reference to the statute or the regulation that she's saying that there's two different entities occupying the same premises. Obviously, if that's occurring, that's a concern. And what you said, Mr. Chair, about whether we had an unauthorized change in ownership, the wrong word, but control of the licensee.
Okay, thank you. Is there any questions from the board, or any comments or action that the board wishes to take at this time?
Mr. Chairman, Bruce Schulte.
Mr. Schulte.
Yeah, I think that there's components to this that we're never going to be able to resolve, and should not have to. I would suggest perhaps a fourth alternative, which is a variant on a couple of them that you suggest, and that would be to move to approve with delegation, but the delegation being simply a verification that the current license before us meets the statutory requirements and the regulatory requirements that have been laid out, completely independent of any ongoing litigation, because that's a civil matter that we have no standing in. And I don't want to throw it to the director and staff to try and wade through that. I would want to simplify it to simply, does it meet our regulations or not, and delegate it in that manner.
Ms. Wilson, do you have a response?
This is Jaime through the chair. I agree with everything Mr. Schulte just said.
Okay.
And if we're asking for my opinion, that's
there were some people coming on or getting off, so could you repeat that, Ms. Wilson?
You had mentioned my name, but I didn't hear your complete question. And if it's, what do I think of that fourth alternative? I think that's a reasonable alternative.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other comments from the board, or is there a motion?
Well, then, Mr. Chairman, I move to approve with delegation, the license number, oh, shoot. I've lost it now.
It is license 23988, Green Degree, Standard Marijuana Cultivation Facility.
Yes, it is. With delegation, and the delegation being simply just, verification that they do in fact meet current regulatory and statutory requirements independent of their civil issues.
Okay, is there a second?
This is Jaime, I'll second it.
Okay, it's been seconded. Mr. Clinkhart, did you understand the delegation?
Yes, I believe we can handle that between licensing and enforcement. We can look at it with a fine-tooth comb and give you guys whether or not that meets it.
Okay. Are there any comments from any board members?
This is Jaime. I do have just a real brief comment.
Yes.
And that's just that, like I said, I agreed. I seconded this proposal because I agree with it. I don't think licenses or license applications should be postponed due to any sort of civil liability or. So that's just where I'm at.
Okay. Any other comments from any other board members? Okay, then the motion before us is to approve license 23988, Green Degree, Standard Marijuana Cultivation Facility, with delegation, and that the delegation be simply that the application under consideration meets the requirements of our current regulations and statutes. With that, Mr. Miller, your vote.
Yes.
Mr. DeShock, your vote. Mr. DeShock?
Yes.
Mr. Jaime?
Yes.
Mr. Schulte?
Yes.
And I'm a no. So that passes 4-1. I assume, Mr. Schulte, you would want to make a motion on license 23989, Next Degree Marijuana Product Manufacturing Facility.
Well, yes, I would. I would move to approve with delegation, similar delegation, license number 23989, Next Degree.
Okay, is there a second?
Second, the shock.
Okay. Okay. I would point out that since this is a manufacturing, and I believe he has looks like there's about 20 products listed.
He just let me know he's on his way. He definitely just woke up.
Somebody has unmuted their phone and
He's gonna have to figure out his shit so he can be to his job.
I don't know about his dog, but please mute your phone.
No, a good thing I don't.
Mr. Schulte, your delegation is just on the license, has nothing to do with the products.
Correct.
Okay? All right. So let's vote on the approval of the license, not the products, with delegation, and the delegation being the same as the previous license, that the staff has determined that all of our statutory requirements are met. So with that, Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Schulte.
Yes.
Mr. DeShock.
Yes.
Mr. Jaime?
Yes.
And I'm a no. We now need to deal with the products. I believe, and since we're coming up on the noon hour, do we want to table the products till the next meeting, or do the board want to deal with the products after lunch?
I'd suggest we pick it up after lunch.
Okay. Any objections to that? Okay. So it is now 11:58. We will come back at 1 o'clock, and we will pick up on license 23.